All right, good afternoon. We are back. And we are back with our budget update and our Director of Management and Budget, Ted Zaleski. So, good afternoon.
You're not going to wait for the crowd to get in?
It's here.
Wait for it, Ted. No, go ahead.
All right. In no particular formal way, I offer you guys a lot of updates on things that are going on. And we've tried to do this from time to time and just never seem to get on a real good schedule. But really just stopping in to say, given a point in time, how are things looking as we move through the budget year? Remembering the exact numbers I'm going to tell you is really not going to be important. It's just more, to give you a sense of how things are playing out. Right now, when we look to the end of fiscal year 19 and say, what do we think our ending position will be? And remember, we still have a long way to go. A lot of things could happen. So it's just with what we know now. We would figure to end up with about $5.9 million left over at the end of the year. About $200,000 of that would be a contribution from revenue. The rest of it is because we're saying there's money that was appropriated that we don't believe will be spent. Now remember, every year in your budget, you're assuming that money is going to be left over from a previous year to carry forward into another year. For 21, that would be $3.9 million from fiscal year 19. So if we end up with 5.9, 3.9 is already earmarked, meaning we would expect to end up with about $2 million, which would be available to save or make other choices.
You're always so full of excitement with those figures, Ted.
Well, I can only give you the news that's there.
It's positive.
Well, yeah, right. You could have went the other way.
This is good news so far. Keep going.
Yeah, well, at least it's not wonderful news, but it's good in that it's not bad. It's not negative news. On the revenue side, what we're basically saying is right now we're going to come in at about budget. Property tax we think will be about $1 million up. 700,000 of that or so is because new construction was actually greater than the assumption that we made. And the other 300,000 is railroad and public utilities. We don't get a lot of information on this, and sometimes numbers change in ways we can't explain, but this year it was a positive change. Income tax is the big story. Right now we're saying we could end up about flat or about on budget, but we just got our second major distribution. Disappointing. The big story there is that withholdings and estimated payments are down against our budget. All the other stuff is not about what's happening today. It's about what happened last year or two years ago. So the thing we'd really like to see, the good news on, we didn't get it. Looking ahead to the end of the year on income tax is challenging almost to the point of absurdity. I can't tell you with any confidence where we're going to end up. And I think it is literally true that we could still end up the year $5 million to the good or $5 million to the bad. There's just so many unknowns that we can't tell you. Now, I was really hoping that this was going to be a stronger distribution. We'd have been coming off, a 2 or 3 in a row and have some sense that we're heading somewhere. Commissioner Wance and I were talking briefly before we started. The state is going to be releasing their new revenue projections probably in the next week or so. There's rumblings that they're going to be writing down their revenue projections. So we'll be interested to hear what actually comes of that and what is driving their thinking. Recordation is our third biggest revenue, although it's nowhere near the size of the top two. We had seen recordation drop precipitously during the recession and following. It's been starting to come back. It's hard to know, where we thought that would level off. We think maybe we're finding out where it's leveling off, and that's a little bit short of what we had been assuming. So we're figuring now about $500,000 less than budget at the end of the year. And I have to say there, even this one is not a nice, neat drawing a line. The last couple months of the year can sometimes suddenly give us a lot more than we were counting on or a lot less than we were counting on. Cable franchise fee revenue is not a big revenue. I just mentioned this because we've been talking for years about the possibility that this would become a flat or declining revenue. And in fact, at some time, if the big telecoms are successful, this might just go away entirely. But the Community Media Center is overwhelmingly dependent on this revenue. We've actually seen it decline this year. Now, it's not enough information to say we've started a new path downward, but it's certainly interesting. We haven't seen this happen before. But we have this about $100,000 under budget right now. So not a lot of dollar impact, but something to be watching. Another relatively small one, but worth mentioning, we got killed on the wine festival this year with the weather. We got about a couple $100,000 less revenue than we would have anticipated. On the expenditure side, we see right now about $1.1 million unexpended in public works. That's largely salary savings, but also utilities and fuel. We've been having good experience on the cost of our fuels and utilities. Sheriff, we're looking at maybe a couple $100,000 over budget. This is connected to overtime. Fortunately, we don't have a lot of detail to dig into this, but we think this is primarily about staffing the training academy and getting police officers into the schools before we have all the SROs hired and trained. Another $500,000 or so of savings in a number of places. Reserve for contingency, we still have about $4 million sitting there. Now, our snow removal budget, we still haven't fully accounted for everything that's happened so far, but we think we're about to the point where we've spent what was budgeted. So if tomorrow turns into something or there are other events, that will start to eat into our reserve for contingencies. But right now, there's about $4 million still sitting there.
The snow removal is not in the DPW that you just mentioned a few minutes ago?
It is.
Or is it a separate line item specifically designated for snow removal?
Yes,
Okay.
and actually, we call it storm emergencies. It's
Okay.
primarily about snow removal, but it's also about washouts and
Right.
trees down
Okay.
and things like that. And in fact, I'm glad that we went there. We got off to a bad start this year with the heavy rains early in this fiscal
Right.
year. We were dealing with a lot of washouts and trees down. And then the dam breach at Cascade, we spent a good bit of money on. So we spent a lot more before we even reached the snow season than we typically would in other years. Just wanted to briefly mention solid waste. This would go back to the last board, so Commissioners Boucher and Rothstein, I don't even know if you're aware of this yet, but the commissioners approved a plan to reduce the amount of solid waste we were transferring out of the county and to bury more of that in the landfill. That was connected to buying a new compactor that would, the hope was, allow us to put more in without actually taking up more space. But this was all supposed to lead to an idea of the solid waste fund building up some funds toward other moves in the future. Because of the change in the recycling market and because of, again, the heavy rains and the amount of leachate being produced in the landfill, which we then need to take somewhere, what we would have hoped was going to be about accumulation of $1.5 million this year is looking like more like $500,000. So we're going to be to the good, but if you don't look another layer behind that, you wouldn't see that that's really just covering up the problem. So we are not accumulating money at the kind of rate that we would have hoped for. Oh yeah, something to come. We don't have hard numbers on this yet, the Recovery Support Services facility, we are bidding this out again, did an evaluation of the facility, and we believe there's work that we're going to need to do to put it into an appropriate condition to hand off to the next vendor. Right now, we have a preliminary estimate of about $60,000. That's not budgeted anywhere, so if this happens, we would be coming to you to look for a transfer, which would be, another hit against the reserve. Okay, unless there's questions, that's all I wanted to share with you, kind of just a snapshot look.
Do you want to go through this?
Yes. Okay, then, next up, there's 2 actions we're looking for you to take. One, you had approved a transfer of $10,000 to the Tech Biz, is that what it's called? Biz Tech. After you approved that, there was some more conversation that kind of led to, well, let's hold off on that, which eventually led to, no, we're not happy with the way things are going, let's not move that money to them. So you took an action to move the money. It never actually got moved because of the continuing conversation. But what we need you to do now is to take an action to say, the action we took saying move the money needs to go away.
So when was this all decided?
That was the way.
The 60th board.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was supposed to be an event they were going to do, and it was
Right.
going to help fund the
It never
event, and the event
happened.
never happened.
Right.
so.
Right, so the money's never been moved, so you don't need to do a budget transfer, but they're still hanging out there. You basically took a vote to say, move the money.
So where's the money going to move back to?
It never moved anywhere.
Where was it from? What line, where is it?
It would have come out of the reserve for
Okay,
contingencies.
got it.
But-
So you need a motion to leave the money in reserve for.
Well, actually, the motion needs to be to, I don't know,
Retract
to
the motion.
reverse or retract operating resolution 19.01.
What he said.
Well,
Second.
Wait a minute, we got to do it officially here.
I'll make a motion to retract resolution 19.01. It was probably made by Commissioner Weaver,
I'll second.
except for that end part.
Okay, did you want to ask something, Ed? I got
no,
a sense that, you
I'm
good?
I'm good.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
Okay, so now we're basically at a point as if it had never happened.
okay.
All right.
And then we need your approval for a capital transfer. This is in connection with the project at Harrisville and Gillis Falls, where the state made some improvements for safety purposes. You provided funding out of a capital project that we have set up called Transportation State Projects. We didn't have this information when the project started, but eventually it became clear there was going to need to be we'd need to move some utilities. And there was a cost of $28,759.80. What we're suggesting is moving that additional amount out of that same Transportation State project to the Harrisville Gillis Falls project.
Now, why are you proposing this is not DPW? Or is this not a DPW action?
Well, this has already happened. They could come in to talk about this, but we were coming in to do some of this budget update and cleanup, so it just seemed like a place to take care of it. The money's already spent, the project is already done. We're really just getting the money in the right place now.
The money spent was authorized to be spent?
Oh, yes.
What's the amount again?
$28,759.80.
And where do you need to move from?
It'd be going from capital project 8629, Transportation State Projects, to the Harrisville Gillis Falls project, number 8740.
I'll try. I'll make a motion to move $28,759.80 from project 8629 to project 8740.
I'll second it.
Well done. Any other questions on that? you guys know what that project was, right?
Yeah.
I'm very grateful the last board
Okay.
worked on that. It's
Absolutely.
very important to my constituents. I avoid that intersection on my motorcycle.
Good move.
Extremely dangerous. I'm so happy we're doing something about it.
Yeah. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Okay, and now is not the time to take this up, but just to plant a seed on that project where we moved the money from. We've talked about this in the past, and I'd like to renew the conversation. The project was set up to help spur state projects for things like Route 26, Route 32, Route 97. I don't believe the thinking at the time was to use it like we did for this sort of project, although it was a state project. I think one of three things needs to happen. We need to change what we believe the scope of this project is to say it is our intent to use it for projects like this, to recognize that the amount of money that's going into it is never going to be enough to make the state move on 26 or 32 and increase the amount of money we're putting into it, or to recognize that it's not going to be enough money and quit putting money into it. So again, not a conversation for today, but just.
How much money are we putting into that on an ongoing basis?
Well, in the current plan, we have 200,000 each year's fiscal year 20, 21, and 22. And we just spent 300 and some thousand out of it. I don't know, do you know what's in there now?
Balance-wise,
Yeah.
Wasn't it 1 million? Is there a pre,
800,000.
800,000 is what's remaining?
That's what's
It was
remaining.
1.1,
Okay,
we
but that would
moved
be
300.
before this one, right?
Well, before the 28,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's about $800,000 there with another 600 over 3 years planned to go in. But $1.4 million is not going to make one of those projects happen.
No, but I think having a conversation with MDOT and SHA on what would be those thresholds to have them match on a specific project on 3226 is important. Because we could say, yes, it ain't the 15 million necessary to do a match with the state, but it may be close enough to get us to where we want to go with this. And I don't know. But having that conversation, which I'm going to be having soon with them, to understand what would kind of move the needle to getting a project in place.
Yep.
So,
Yep, and certainly those are good conversations to have. I think what you're going to find, though, is they're talking millions or tens of millions, not
I
hundreds of
understand.
thousands. But like I said, one of the options for you would be to say, we want to commit more resources to this.
I think having a conversation first, I apologize, before talking about committing anything, is the prudent thing to do, so.
Oh, yeah, yep, absolutely. Okay, now we're shifting gears a little bit. Here to talk to you about county infrastructure. First, I want to mention Heidi Pepin is here, our longest tenured budget analyst. She's with us because she's been kind of shepherding this project. Although it is the work of the entire budget office and I don't know how many people in the various agencies who are involved. I'm actually going to kind of quickly run through a presentation that I've already done for 3 of you, just as a reminder for the 3, and so the other 2 can hear it for the first time, to talk about what is it that we're talking about at all. And then we're going to get into 3 specific pieces with more useful information about, okay, what are we going to do with this? So, infrastructure in a really big way, what we're talking about is, how do we get our arms around this idea of the stuff that we own and what that means for us? So what's the goal here? And actually, I have a half dozen goals, I think. One is, we want to know what we have. We want to figure out everything that's out there. And that, just by itself, is a big, still incomplete job. We've learned a lot, but we don't have everything we want yet.
You are working on that, though, aren't they,
Oh, yes,
presently?
we are. Oops. We want to understand, of all those things we own, how long do we expect them to be here? Not used to working left-handed. You would think I could keep left and right and forward and backward straight, but apparently not.
I'll have to ask.
And then we want to understand, what do we think it's going to cost when something does need to be replaced or renewed? What is that going to cost us? Then we want to assess, and this is a very theoretical kind of idea here, but what's the average annual amount we need to fund over many years these pieces of infrastructure? Then we want to start building implementation plans for funding and renewing, moving from a theoretical what's going to take to saying what are we actually going to do. And then I want to come out of this a process, an ongoing process for discussion about how are we going to fund this and how is renewing our infrastructure going to work. And it won't be too deep into this before you start to develop some sense that once we identify all this, we might not be in a position to simply act on all of it. And might not be is really pretty generous. I think we're going to find we will not be in a position to act on all this.
Maybe semantics, but for me to understand it best, that last bullet seems to me is the goal. The other 5 are objectives to get us to that goal.
Okay.
And the reason is we won't know when we hit success. If you turn this to a goal. So again, maybe it's that military experience in planning, but because I was waiting to see how do I know when there's success, and the bottom bullet, that is the success, and that is building the process necessary to do the things we want to achieve. So appreciate it. Thanks.
So when I talk about our infrastructure, what am I talking about? In the highest level way, I'm saying everything we own that we think we're going to have to replace someday, I'm calling all that infrastructure. Now, we could argue over exactly what infrastructure means, but I'm just saying that's what I'm working with. Now, there are big, obvious things. I mean, you go out there, you're driving on a road, you know it's there. You drive by a school, you know it's there. There are smaller things that are pretty obvious, too. Your kid goes playing in a tot lot, it's there. You're having lunch in a pavilion, you're on a walking trail. Then there are things that aren't obvious at all. And some, like storm drains, are out of sight. You don't see them, you probably don't think about them very much, except when we have a pipe collapse, there's a hole in the road, and now the road's shut down. I'm not going to go into all the detail of this. I'm just going to speed through this for now, because the detail is going to be coming in these other presentations. But I want you to be thinking about the breadth of what I'm talking about when I talk about infrastructure. We have roads, bridges, senior centers, technology. Technology, people usually think in terms of using technology, but what I'm talking about is, the computers, the monitors, the cabling, the routers, the switches, the servers, all the stuff that we can actually touch and at some point have to buy again. Our fleet, 6 libraries, a multi-building community college campus, county office buildings. We have this building, we have the Burke building, we have the Robert Moten building, we have the courthouse annex. We're about to build a headquarters for the state's attorney. The fiber network, you were all talking about access to fiber and broadband, but we need to recognize that's a tangible thing that will not last by itself forever. Now, that's an interesting one, though. We have had discussions where we say by the time we need to fully replace a fiber network, maybe we will have moved on to other technology and fiber is no longer relevant. We don't know that yet. Schools. Now, we don't own the schools. They're not technically our infrastructure, but the school system owns it, but they don't have any money to renew their infrastructure. Just like their operating budget, they're dependent on the state and on us for the funding to make that happen. Stormwater ponds. We have a firearms facility, a landfill, a maintenance facility, Union Mills, parks. And parks means a lot of different things. You have playing fields, nature centers, pavilions, trails, tot lots, courts, the sports complex, which is kind of its own thing. But, talking about parks is actually one of the more complicated pieces of this because you have so many different things. Storm drains and pipe crossings. Some of you have heard me say this before, but when we started digging into this, one of the things that really got me thinking when I heard we have almost 1 million linear feet of storm drains. That's a lot of storm drain. Parking lots, entrance drives. When I talk about entrance drives, you think about things like the road up to the Ag Center or the road from Route 26 back to Mayeski Park. Farm Museum, water and sewer, we have pumping stations, treatment plants, got the big water tanks, pipes, manholes, and a whole lot more. It's a work in progress, but we have the Public Safety Training Center, our Emergency Communications Network. And this is not a list of everything, but just I wanted to give you enough to get you thinking, okay, yeah, there's a lot of stuff we need to be thinking about. Now, it might be reasonable to say, okay, well, this all makes sense. Why haven't we done this already? And part of the answer is, for years, for decades really, we were very focused on creating infrastructure, not renewing it. As we were building our way through the 70s and 80s and 90s, a lot of what we're talking about was going down. The roads were being built, the storm drains were being put in, the schools were being built. And ideally, we would have been dealing with both things. But even during those boom times, there wasn't unlimited money. And I talk about schools. The focus was very much on providing enough capacity so that there were enough seats for kids. And if you go back to the facility master plans that the Board of Education would have been approving those years, I mean, they always recognized the need for modernizations of schools, but those were not the highest priorities. The next capacity project was the highest priority. To a great extent, even as that infrastructure aged, we've been taking care of problems as they emerged. It's only in recent years that we started talking about the need for a more comprehensive way of dealing with this. When I say in recent years, we've been talking about this for a half dozen years maybe. And the reason it hasn't moved along more quickly is this is a really big, time-consuming job. And the reality of it is we find little cracks in time and we do a little bit of it at a time. And it's not just about the budget office time, it's about all the agencies who are actually the ones dealing with all this infrastructure. They only have so much time available too. So we've been working at it as we can. And even today, we're coming to you with 3 pieces, but this is just the beginning. And I don't know how long to tell you it's going to take before we get through all of the pieces. And talking about the other agencies, I'm here with, part of the budget office, but eventually my expectation is this will be less about us and more about the agencies, that they will be here talking to you about the infrastructure that they need to maintain, and here's the funding I have, here's the need, what choices are we going to make? Now, it's always going to be part of what we have to deal with because in the end, it's about the money. But the primary focus will need to be on public works, talking about storm drains, or rec and parks, talking to you about pavilions. So how are we approaching this? And there's 2 different ways we're looking at this. The first is average annual funding needed. And this is a really very theoretical number because the average is never, well, in most cases, is never going to be the right number. We have some things like our road maintenance program pretty much does work as an average. We're putting in a relatively constant amount of money and we're doing the projects as they happen. But when you're talking about schools or parks or no other examples popping in my mind, it tends to be lumpier. You need to do, bridges. Yeah. You're doing this much this year, this much this year, this much the next. And the second way we want to look at it is a real-life implementation timeline. With the average funding, it doesn't matter what you did last year or what's planned for next year because you're talking about what does this look like over decades. With the real-life implementation, it does matter what you did next year, because if that has a 30-year life, you're not talking about that one for another 29 years. And you need to be thinking about what are the ones that are coming up in the years that we're planning for. Then we want to get to a point where we can compare, for all of these pieces of infrastructure, what's the average annual funding needed compared to how much money we're actually putting into the budgets. And here's where I'm saying, I don't know the answer to that yet, but in a general way, I'm pretty sure I know the answer is we're going to find out the need is greater than what's going in. And then we need to start talking about the implications of that. What choices are we going to make? And once this is in front of us, there are going to be hard choices to make. Once you know we're not putting in enough to maintain that piece of infrastructure, I mean, it's hard to just say, oh, well, we'll just see how things work out. But it's very unlikely you're going to have enough money to be able to say, okay, we've identified it, let's take care of all of it. I kind of jumped ahead of myself, and I already talked about this slide. And, when I talk about, lumpiness, this is nothing real, just to give you an idea how to think about it. If you look at each one of those points as being how much will we need to fund in that year, if you figured out the average, there are going to be some years where you're going to need less than the average, and some where you're going to need more. Now, we can set up a process where we would plan to budget the appropriate amount in each year. A problem with that is, in those high years, you're going to be left to say, are we going to be able to identify that much money when we get there? The other way you could do it is in those low years, say, okay, we're going to set money aside so we're prepared for those high years. That will always be challenging, because you will always be faced with needs in that year that could be solved with that money in that year. What we're proposing to you will never be right. There's too much we don't know. There are variables we can't control. We're never going to be able to tell you, okay, commissioners, this is how it's going to work. And there are things that we know we're going to have to deal with. Prices will change. With a lot of this, asphalt is a big part of what we're talking about with our roads and our paving, and asphalt prices can be very volatile. We're in a fairly good time right now, but we've been at times where it's like, okay, we budgeted $2 million for this project. Asphalt just went up 30%. We need another $400,000 for this project. The urgency of projects will change. We're going to plan this as best we can, but sometimes we'll find priorities have changed. Maybe your priorities have changed, or something we thought we could wait 5 years isn't going to wait 5 years. We need to deal with it in the third year. Sometimes, we're going to say we believe this has an average life of 30 years. Sometimes it's not going to go for 30 years. Sometimes it might be able to wait longer than 30 years. We won't know until we get there. Some replacements will change in nature. During the building boom for schools, we did a lot of what they call single-ply roofs, which is a relatively inexpensive way of doing the roofs. Unfortunately, they don't have as long a life as other ways. The reason we did that was there was the need for the buildings, there was only so much money, and that was the choice that was made at the time. We are now, as we've been replacing those single plies, we've been moving to what they call built-up roofs, or even to metal roofs, which will have much longer lives. So our calculations will change. As each one of those roofs moves, that average annual number is actually going to decrease, because we're going to get longer lives. We have things like, in recent years, we've been using a relatively new technology to line pipes in our water and sewer system. At one time, pipes that we would have dug up and physically replaced, we are lining without having to go through that. The more that we do, the more our calculations will change. There will be other things like that that we can't even anticipate now. And then there's other things that happen, like our emergency communication system used to be an analog system. It's now a digital system. What we were planning for back then had less than full relevance for what we're planning for today. Other things like that will happen. Some other considerations. Even if we have the money available to do more for the infrastructure, there are things that might get in the way of us doing that. Do we have enough employees to do the work that is necessary to get these projects in place? Will there be enough vendor contracting capacity available out there to handle the work? And we've been here with roads before. There have been with times where we said, well, why don't we put more money into the roads program? But one of the things we had to think about was, is there anybody out there to handle the work? More funding for infrastructure could lead to increased operating costs. I talked about impact on staff. You might find that if you really want this to happen, you have to hire additional positions. So now you've got additional ongoing operating costs along with the new capital costs. And then we need to think about the implications if we can't or don't provide the funding. We know these things have limited lives. The tot lot will only last so long. Either it gets replaced or it has to get torn down. Bridges are a tougher one. A tot lot going away might make some people unhappy. A bridge going away means a road connection is no longer there. So today was really to get the conversation started, to get you thinking about these things. We're going to be coming back, including in just a couple minutes, to start talking about all the pieces. This last bullet is one of my, again, beaten down hopes. I thought this was something we'd be able to accomplish that will not be happening. No matter what comes of this specifically, in the end, I think we'll be better off for having a better understanding of our infrastructure, for knowing what it is we have and where it is. We will have better quantified, even if we can't do it, what it would take to renew the infrastructure. We will have developed the collaborative process between the budget office and the service providing agencies to keep this thing going. And back to Commissioner Rothstein's point, we will have created the process with the commissioners to say, how are we going to make these choices? Okay, so you want to go to bridges? Okay, so now we're going to talk about our actual first three pieces of this. First up is bridges. Okay, don't start it yet. I'm going to hang on until Commissioner Wance comes back, I hope.
Who initiated this process?
We did.
It's good. It's running it like a business.
Well, yeah, it's hard to remember exactly the origins, but over time things start to creep in my mind as worries and start to figure out, well, how do we do something about this? And it's really been an evolving process. We've kind of been figuring out as we go. Okay, we need to figure this out. Okay, well, how are we going to do that? Oh, here's something we never thought about. What are we going to do with this? And actually, we're going to show you 3 videos here. Even this was a part of that evolving process. We had a lot of stuff, but we were talking about how do we make this real for you guys? How do we get it to be something that's not, oh, yeah, we hear you talking, but to make you feel like, okay, yeah, I see what they're talking about. And I'm hoping these videos are going to play a part there.
You were always the most sobering person to come before us. In a good way.
I was at a community college board of trustees meeting once. This has been a number of years, but I think it was during a particularly bad time, and I gave them an update on where we were. And a teacher at the college stopped me after and said, I've never had my heart so eloquently ripped out before.
That slide you showed about the ups and downs with this was, I know you pulled the ups and downs out of the air, but was it $3 million about what we're looking, or is that just pulled out of the air too?
No, it had absolutely no meaning at all. It was just to give a sense of
I was hoping.
things won't be straight lines.
A sense of uncertainty will be in front of us.
I like when we were down Mako and you gave your presentation about budget and you talked about bridges, and that was scary. What's out
Oh, that's
there?
right. So you've already seen this video.
I'm gonna keep my mouth shut. I'm just saying, and that was another very sobering thing.
Yeah, I forgot about this. This first bridges thing we're doing, I actually did a presentation down at Mako to share what we've been doing with this, and didn't have a big crowd, but I got some pretty interesting reactions from people.
There's a limited amount of nerds that really get into what you do.
Okay, not sure what his call is or how long he's going to go. Do you,
I say let's go.
Let's go.
all right.
Louder. Matt, can you make it louder?
The Carroll County Department of Public Works is responsible for 154 bridge structures on county roads, including 133 major structures and 21 small structures. A major structure is defined by federal standards as having an opening measured along the center of the roadway of more than 20 feet, while minor structures are less than 20 feet. The distinction between a major and small structure is significant because of federal requirements for major structures and financial implications of that classification. While major structures are mandated for biennial inspections by the federal government, all structures in Carroll County, regardless of size, are inspected on at least a 2-year cycle. This hands-on inspection process is performed by a private bridge engineering and inspection consulting firm under contract with the State Highway Administration. The findings including condition inspection and documentation, evaluation of the condition, photographs, and repair and maintenance recommendations are summarized in a detailed written report provided to the Department of Public Works and the State Highway Administration. Some repairs are able to be completed in-house by road operations staff, while others are contracted out due to the nature or complexity of the repairs. All costs for minor structures are entirely the county's responsibility. Carroll County's 154 bridge structures include 9 types: concrete slab, multiple steel stringer, multiple concrete box, through steel truss, steel pipe culvert arch, concrete pipe box culvert, acro panel truss, concrete beams, and timber. The average life expectancy of the structure is dependent on the type of bridge, but ranges from 30 to 80 plus years. Multiple steel stringer bridges and concrete pipe box culverts are the most predominant, comprising 70% of all structures in Carroll County, Maryland. Delay in the replacement of a structure can lead to a number of issues, including increased costs, bridge closings, and posted weight limits. Increased costs means additional funding for a project, using citizen tax dollars and taking away from other county initiatives and projects.
Yeah, another constraint on getting through all this, I should mention, that was Chris Swam's voice there, if you didn't recognize it, and he's also the one who put together the video, and Greg and Matt contributed some of the video there. Chris only has so much time to devote to this project, so we have to kind of work through that as well. So we wanted you to see that to really see bridges and think about them. And so much, we're just out there driving. You go across a bridge, you might not give it any thought at all. We have some bridges where you literally would not give it any thought because unless you know you're on a bridge, you wouldn't notice it. You have to get out and look from the stream side to see, oh, there's a bridge there. So 154 bridges in Carroll County. If you start to think about each one of those having a limited life, and you think about 154, there's a lot that needs to be considered to keep renewing your bridges. Oh, let's go up to the third slide. Now, Chris mentioned federal funding. So we have basically these little bridges that are totally our responsibility, although they do get inspected by the state, and then our bigger bridges, which are 80% funded with federal funding. Now that's all the costs of the bridge. It also includes work we do for cleaning and painting that help prolong the lives of the bridge. It's important to understand, though, that federal funding is not driven by our need. It's driven by how much they've determined they're going to give us. This is kind of like state funding for school construction, where we can say, okay, we have projects that are eligible for state funding totaling $100 million. That doesn't mean we're going to get $100 million. We're going to get what the state thinks they have. This is even more that way in that they're not considering individual projects for how much they're going to fund at all. We know, unless they change, how much funding is coming from the state. And our bridge program is programmed to work with the amount of money that's going to be coming in. And what we get done can depend a lot on the size of the projects we're talking about. You know, we have a bridge like Shepherd's Mill on the way to Union Bridge, which was a $3 million plus project. We have other smaller bridges, which might be a $500,000 project.
But you know each year how much money you're getting from the state for bridges?
Yes, unless something changes
And
at
it's
some
been that
point.
way for a while.
2015, that I'm aware, it has not really changed
How much
since
are you getting?
2015.
1.1, 1.2?
I think after the inspection funding that comes out, it's about 1.1,
Wow,
1.2.
doesn't seem like too much.
The bridge on the left there is Hollingsworth Bridge. That is a county-only bridge. Then Mumford, crossing over into Frederick County, would be eligible for federal funding. This is White Rock Road Bridge, which was just recently replaced, and we're going to show you before and after. And as you might have caught already with just a few bridges you've seen, you know, every bridge is a unique project. It's not like you can say, okay, here's a plan for a bridge, go use it on this one. You have to react to what the bridge is you have, what the stream crossing is like, what your road is like. Every time we identify a bridge as coming up for replacement, then the work starts to say, what kind of structure are we going to use to replace this bridge? How do we make it work for the spot that we have to build it in? And you know, Chris mentioned this in the video, but it's important to remember when we delay the need to replace a bridge, we've already said it needs to be replaced. You know, the costs are climbing the longer it takes us to get to us. Sometimes we get to the point where we have to put up weight limits and say if vehicles over a certain weight are no longer allowed to go across this bridge, which inconveniences somebody. And sometimes, this doesn't happen too often, but sometimes we even get to the point where we have to close the bridge, which is, of course, an inconvenience to everybody who uses it.
So bridges that are in good repair don't have weight limits on them?
Well, there could be weight limits for different bridges, and I'm not prepared to really talk about how that works in Carroll County.
Okay.
But what we're saying is you would be putting a limit on it that's less than what was
Less than what it
intended
was
to
paid
go
for, right,
across
okay.
it. Yeah. Okay, now talk a little bit more about these funding methodologies. I talked about average annual funding and our project timeline. The average annual funding is built on a lot of assumptions. We think we're making reasonable assumptions, but again, we can't tell you this is exactly how it's going to work out. But we're looking at square foot size of the bridge. Now, of course, the kind of bridge you're building, even at the same square feet, could lead to different costs. We're looking at the type of replacement we're going to make, the useful life of the bridge, and then the cost per square foot. After that, it's just math, and we're getting to a number that says, of all the bridge types we have, over all the years we're going to replace it, we think we need X number of dollars a year to be able to keep renewing this. The project timeline is much more specific to the bridge we're talking about, not just to bridges in general. But we're making the same sorts of assumptions, but we're making it for that bridge. And then that would lead to a schedule that's based on an assumed replacement year. And again, that goes back to when do we think we'll actually have federal funding available to do this bridge. Now, a lack of funding hasn't been a big problem for us. We've mostly been able to keep up with the bridges. And in fact, arguably, until I show you something a little bit later, if you had asked us or you had asked Public Works, we all would have said, you know, bridges is a place where we're doing a good job. We're keeping up. The money that's available is enough to do what we need to do. Hold on to that thought, though. Okay, so average annual funding. The column that says unlimited federal funding is not real. There is not unlimited federal funding. But this is just to show you, if it worked that way, we're saying in fiscal year $20, And for all these things we're talking about today's dollars. No matter how many years out, we're talking about today's dollars. We know, though, that when we build a real timeline, you will have to be building in inflation and costs. But we would need about $3 million a year. About 2.4 of that would come from the federal government. About 0.6 would come from the county. That's for the federally funded bridges. Then we need another $100,000 a year for the bridges that the federal government doesn't fund at all. So total county funding in that scenario would be about $700,000 a year. That's not real. The next column says we still need about $3 million a year. We're going to get about 1.2 from the state, from the federal government, meaning the county would need to come up with about $1.8 million a year to keep up with that annual average need. The $100,000 for small bridges remains the same. So, but the county's need on an average annual basis would be about $1.9 million.
Is there a federal formula for this, Ted, that we go by or not?
I don't know how they determine it.
Okay, the only reason I'm asking is because, as several of us in the room know, we were contacted by Van Hollen's office to come up with challenges that we feel need to be changed or added or whatever. Perhaps this may be an area that we could, I don't know.
Doesn't hurt to ask, but I think the problem we would face in getting action on that would be unless they're going to increase the size of the total pot. You know, it's one of these things where giving us more means they're taking it away from somebody.
Right.
Now, if they'd be willing to increase the size of the pot, that would be great.
Okay.
Okay.
Food for thought. Add that to the list, will you? Word that accordingly. Thank you very much.
So we got to a point where we said, with the bridges we have and the expected timelines and the expected costs, if we just laid out when do we think those bridges are going to hit, what does that picture look like? And this was stunning to me when we first saw it. And remember, if you look to the left during those early years, I'm saying everybody would have said we're doing good with bridges. There's not a problem. But as we were digging into this, we got to a point where we're saying the average annual amount is a lot more than what we're really putting in, but we feel like we're doing okay. Something doesn't feel right here. And this is what answered it. You see, you go out far enough, there's going to be a lot of bridges coming due, and the costs are going to go way up. And what we're putting in now won't be anywhere near enough when we get to that point. Now, we're talking about 2050 or something like that. It's not going to be my problem to deal with, but it is going to be somebody's problem.
We'll have
to deal
hovercrafts
with.
by then.
Yeah.
We say that all the time.
But for now, we're working with the assumption that we will continue to need these bridges.
No George Jetson.
Yeah. Now, you might ask, why is that? Why is there this huge pile? And we can't answer that with certainty, but there's two things we believe explain this. One is Tropical Storm Agnes in 1972. Carroll County replaced a bunch of bridges in a relatively short period of time. A lot of those bridges are going to be coming due. And the other is, we talked about those decades of building infrastructure. We were building it, and now they're starting to age. And some of that is coming together there. And you don't even need to think about the details to look at this picture and say, if we've been doing a good job at that first 10 years, that might not be enough when we get to the rest of this. Now, I've said this, and we're going to say this multiple times before we're never going to get through this. As we go through this, this is scary, and I don't know what the answer to this is, but I feel a lot better knowing that this is in front of us. We've seen it, we've looked at it, we've thought about it, we've made decisions knowing that this is here, than simply allowing things to continue on without us having even realized what is hanging out there for us. Okay. Now, this is that same timeline, except we're looking at federal funding and county funding. You see, we have an assumption that the federal funding remains the same. Now, that could change over time. They could put more in, but we can't ignore the possibility that at some point the federal government might say, you know what, we can't afford this anymore, or it's not our job to maintain these, and federal funding could decrease or go away. So, but right now, with what we know, whatever risk we're facing is entirely a county risk. we would have to figure out where's the funding going to come from. Now, some challenges and concerns. We're heavily reliant on federal funding, although over time it's going to become a smaller and smaller piece of that entire picture. But right now, if federal funding went away, we would be scrambling to figure out, okay, where do we go from here? And it's not clear that we could maintain the current path we're on. There are staffing limitations. Engineering can only handle so many projects with the people that they have available to them. On the federally funded bridges, they require one of our construction inspectors to be on site all the time construction's going on. That means we've got somebody who could be checking multiple things, totally devoted to one project. And it's often dependent on factors that are outside of our control. Sometimes we have land acquisition needs or easement needs, and the owner is not interested. In at least one case I know of, we've shut down a bridge because we couldn't make it work without some land acquisition or easement, and the owner wasn't willing to do it. Stream restrictions and environmental limitations, kind of by definition, there are streams underneath these bridges, and there's a lot we have to do to not adversely impact the streams. And sometimes when we're taking paint off of a bridge in order to repaint it, we actually more or less have to put a big baggie over the bridge. It's a pretty impressive thing to see, but you can't simply scrape the paint and let it go into the stream. And we're also heavily dependent on State Highway Administration. This is federal money, but it flows through the state. We have to put in our proposals to the state, then they work through the money. They are sometimes slower than we would like. It's quite possible that if we had somebody who had the time to really sit on the state people, we might be able to move some things along. But again, you have the staff you have to make choices on what you're going to do with the time.
Is the state looking at this as well? I mean, I know I'm talking about the money because if our bridge money has to go up so much at 2050, and if it's because of St. Agnes, the hurricane, everywhere in the state would probably have a very similar scenario. So if the state's not looking at this, I mean, it's going to affect everywhere. I mean, do you know if they're attuned to this?
I don't know. I would suspect not. And even if they're aware, would they be willing to add state funding to the pot? Right now they're wrestling with Kerwin. Would this bump that out of the way? I don't think so. Yeah, Deb just pointed out the state has bridges on state roads that are their direct responsibility. Okay, parking lots. In some ways, maybe not as interesting as bridges. And another one where you really don't think much about parking lots until you pull into one and say, boy, this thing's really in bad shape. Okay. Yep, go ahead.
The Carroll County Department of Public Works is responsible for the maintenance and care of all county facilities. With more than 1.5 million square feet of buildings, including 45 locations with multiple buildings at some sites, and over 6,500 acres of land. Major county facility infrastructure components include roofing, elevators, parking lots, and heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. A variety of treatment methods are used to maintain parking lots. An overlay paves over existing asphalt with a new cross-section, and the thickness of an overlay depends on the lot and the existing level of distress. Full-depth reclamation rebuilds the existing parking lot by milling the asphalt to produce a new base. Determination of the treatment method depends on the level of distress and the most cost-effective treatment measure, but the intention is to address them before reconstruction is necessary.
Bridges were more exciting.
Yeah, I can't promise that they're all going to be exciting.
You can kayak under a bridge, not over a parking lot.
Well, A little bit more work on the parking lot.
More rain.
Just give you some sense of parking lots with different functions in Carroll County. Libraries, a couple 100,000 square feet. Senior centers, 150,000 square feet. The community college, almost 500,000 square feet. Parks, getting close to 1 million square feet. And I need to point out, this does not include the revenue-producing parks. So Piney Run, Bear Branch, Hoshawa, Sports Complex are not in that number. And they're not in that number because of how we've been funding these. And this is another thing that has gotten us to think a little bit about how to do it. So you're going to hear about those parking lots, just not in that number. North Carroll High School, I broke this out because it's so big and because it has been the topic of so much discussion about what are we going to do with that school. But almost 300,000 square feet of parking lot. And then all of our other facilities, more than 1 million square feet of parking lot. And we're adding. We've got a lot, and we're adding more. Some new additions, things that are in our plans. Leicester Park and Crimgold. These are both adding to existing parks. When we started these parks, there wasn't enough money to complete the entire plan. This is additional phases. But we'd be adding 125,000 or so square feet of parking lot. Recently acquired, I mentioned North Carroll High School, 300,000 square feet, Charles Carroll Elementary School, about 50,000 square feet. And projects in progress, these are soft numbers at this point, but should be in the ballpark of what we get. Westminster Veterans Park, another 30,000. Deer Park, an extension to that park, 45. Another Crimgold extension, 25. And then the new state's attorney's office, 20,000 square feet. All of this adds up to almost 600,000 square feet of additional parking beyond what we have today. Okay, the funding methodologies, same approach we talked about with bridges. Some of the details differ, but we're looking at how much do we have, how long will it last, how are we going to fix it, what kind of useful life do we have. Now, as Chris pointed out in the video, there are different ways we can go about renewing a parking lot. In practice, what we are doing now is almost completely reclamation. The reason we're doing that is because we are not funding at a level that allows us to stay far enough ahead to just go back and do an overlay. By the time we get to them, we're at the point of doing reclamation. Now, if the funding picture changes and over time we're able to get to a place where we are doing overlays as the norm rather than a reclamation, that will change these numbers. The average annual amount would go down because the cost of doing the renewal will go down. And then, the timeline assumption is the same as with the bridges. We're laying out the parking lots, when we expect them to need to be done, and how much it will cost. So average annual funding. We're assuming 20 years. Some will last that long, some will not. Piney Run, we redid a few years ago. I think we were over 30 years, maybe 35 years since we had done that. Like I said, we're making an assumption here that all of these projects are reclamation projects. We have an assumption per square foot cost. This is one that is very subject to change in asphalt prices. It's not hard to imagine that over a 2-year period, this could change by 25%. We don't know. How many square feet we have? We get to average annual funding needed of $540,000. What we have planned in the current CIP is $158,000 a year. So you can see we're noticeably short of hitting that average annual amount. Can you bring up the next piece? Now that was without North Carroll High School in it. If you add North Carroll High School, that ups those numbers some. And again, we presented it this way because of the remaining uncertainty of, are we going to be keeping that facility? Project timeline. $158,000 a year. Now that number actually is growing with assumed cost increases because we're talking about everything else in terms of constant dollars. We showed it that way. Then project timeline, you see the projects that we think should be happening in that time period and how much short we would be in each of those years to match that timeline. Okay, and this is like the bridge graph, not nearly as dramatic, but big enough. You know, if you consider we're putting in $158,000 a year, it's not hard to see that we're going to run up against a time when there won't be anywhere near enough money to keep up with this. And that was a without North Carroll, and then this is with North Carroll. Okay, our Parks Capital Program is largely funded with program open space, shared revenue from the state. The amount of general fund dollars we put in has grown in recent years, but we're still highly dependent on program open space. I'm going to bring up an idea here. This is far from a recommendation for saying we ought to do this. If Jeff Daggetts is watching and telling you, just relax and sit back. This is just so you have the background you need to be able to think about these things in the future. We could be using program open space funding to do more of the paving in the parks. And what this gets down to, you see the second row from the bottom, $147,000. By using program open space, we could free up $147,000 a year of general fund dollars, which you could choose to use in some other way. Of course, the trade-off there is whatever that program open space would have done isn't going to happen. You know, the park expansion or the tot lot or whatever else we might be looking at. And okay, this just builds in what I said about that, using freeing up $147,000. Yeah, if you look back to when we first said this, where it says average annual funding 393 and 449, that previously said 540 and 596. That's the freeing up of the $147,000 a year. Challenges and concerns. Oh, did I skip something? Yep. Oh, okay. Project management. You've heard this come up with other things. We have projects that have been budgeted but aren't moving because we don't have a project manager available to get on that project. Doing more would exacerbate that problem unless we had project managers, or if we contract out project management, but then of course that adds to the cost of the projects. Contractor availability, I mentioned it with bridges, it could come up here. Is there somebody to do a job? Market volatility with steel prices, asphalt prices, we never know for sure. Weather dependent, that's the wrong one. Steel doesn't come into place with parking lots. Weather dependent does come into play with parking lots, though. Sometimes you have bad weather at the wrong time. You have the money, but you can't move ahead on the project. There can be an impact on operations. Ideally, if we were going to pave the community college, we would do the whole thing at one time. Practically, we can't get it done. You can't shut down the college long enough to be able to do that. And even other smaller projects, to redo the paving for a library, we actually do shut down a library for a little while to be able to get that done. And then this idea of that we're doing all full depth reclamations. Ideally, we would be doing overlays, but we would have a long ways to getting ourselves into that position. Any questions on parking lots? And third piece we have today is parks.
Carroll County's Department of Recreation and Parks oversees parks facilities, recreation council activities, and community recreation programs. The parks and recreation infrastructure throughout the county includes 29 inventory county parks. 76 athletic fields, 2 nature centers, Bear Branch and Piney Run, 18 playgrounds and 8 play areas, 11 miles of paved walking trails, 38 miles of natural surface trails, 13 fishing locations, 31 large pavilions, 21 small pavilions, 6 tennis court locations, 5 outdoor basketball court locations, 300-acre lake with kayak, canoe, rowboat, or paddle boat rentals, residential camping facility, sports complex with 5 baseball fields and 2 multi-purpose fields. General maintenance of the park facilities, such as minor repairs, lawn mowing, and restroom upkeep, is expensed through the Recreation and Parks operating budget and the facilities operating budget. The replacements of short-lived assets, such as kayaks, canoes, cabin mattresses, small appliances, kitchen equipment, small tools, and maintenance equipment, are also expensed through the operating budget. Larger repairs, rehabilitations, and replacements of assets are expensed in the capital budget and include items such as building structures, roofs, piers, bridges, paving overlays, pavilions, playgrounds, basketball and tennis courts, backstops, and field lighting.
Well, that was more exciting than parking lot.
Go to the next slide. Covered all that. Okay, and like with parking lots, we're adding to our infrastructure inventory in parks. Something I meant to say a little bit earlier. I think it's going to be important for us as we consider capital projects in the future to more consciously think about these costs in the future. Every time we build something, every time we have one more mile of something or one more whatever, we've now committed to renewing that someday or getting rid of it even though you had it at one time. You're already familiar with us coming to you with capital projects to talk about the operating impact. You know, we will need more people or utility costs will go up or down. That's been a part of our thinking for a long time. What we're thinking about now is how do we bring these numbers to you when you're thinking about building a new school or adding a road or a new tot lot to say, okay, well, that's what's going to cost us today, but we need to be thinking about what does this mean for the future. So what are we adding in parks? Winfield, what's Winfield? Okay.
Across the street from Winfield Elementary.
Okay, I didn't remember that one. But Westminster Veterans Memorial Park, we talked about the expansion to Deer Park, a trail down at Gillis Falls, boat ramp in the Monocacy out Double Pipe Creek. Well, yeah, we'll be in the Monocacy, but at Double Pipe Creek Park. The extensions to Crimgold, Leicester, and the possibility of this Northwest Trail if the rail line is ever available to us. Every one of these things will change the numbers that we're going to talk about upward. Heavily dependent on program open space. When we have program open space, there is a local match required. So program open space never covers the whole thing. It creates an interesting opportunity problem. The state has diverted a lot of program open space over the last decade. They've pushed a little bit back to us. In theory, if they gave us back all the program open space that was once coming to us, that would be a really good thing for the park program, but it would mean we would need to find general fund money that we don't have available right now. Impact fees is a relatively small part of the picture these days, and then general fund. The general funds are mostly aimed at places where program open space won't work. That's not necessarily exclusively true, but we have a project we call Park Restoration, which is more about general maintaining to keep it in good shape than it is in renewing infrastructure. There's some money set aside for trail development and the community self-help projects. Those are the projects where rec and parks or communities will put some money in or put their time in, and we provide some matching money for those projects. The funding methodology, again, same big ideas. The details for these differ. And Rec and Parks is particularly challenging because you have so many different things. You can't just lump together a pavilion with a tot lot with lighting. Yeah, each has its own characteristics. So what we have to do with these is kind of think about methodology A, B, C, D, E, and in the end, blend them all together to say, what do we need over time to renew all of this stuff? And here you can kind of see what I'm talking about. We have different numbers for a bunch of different pieces of this, down even to benches and signs saying $10,000 a year is what you need to renew this over time. Miscellaneous includes a bunch of different stuff, including basketball, tennis courts, pedestrian bridges, piers and docks, gazebos, kiosks, fencing, bike racks, and our Hashiwa swimming pool. But you see, all that adds up to $700,000 a year in today's dollars. And when you look at that relative to what we have in the CIP, again, this is a pretty good news story. We don't feel like we're comfortable that we're covering it all, but we're in the ballpark. This is better than what some of the pictures look like or will look like. And when you look at our timeline, got one big jump. That's lighting at Freedom and Mayeski. Again, good bit in the future. That's 2035. So again, probably not my problem to worry about, but I hate to leave a problem behind for somebody else that hasn't been considered. Some challenges and concerns here. Heavily reliant on program open space. The state makes changes that directly impacts what we're able to do. And in recent years, program open space funding has been so uncertain. Almost every year, what we end up doing is building a plan with what we feel confident will be available and building alternate plans either for the extra money that might be coming in or the money that we might be losing. So on almost every project, it becomes, okay, this one's in either way, this one's in if there's enough money, this one goes out if there's not enough money, and go out might be, gets pushed back a year or 2 years or something. Program open space land acquisition requirement, 25% of the money that's made available to us is restricted to being used for buying land. Now, ideally for us, we would like to be able to use it to keep going what we already have. And when we talk about adding to our infrastructure, again, by definition, we acquire land, we've added to our infrastructure. Even if we don't do anything with it, there's still something we're going to need to do with that land. But presumably, if we buy the land, it's with an idea that we're going to create a park of some sort, so more infrastructure to add to this inventory. Well, and then like we've been talking about, every new addition, adds to the infrastructure replacement costs. And I mentioned that, we've already been considering operating impacts in the past, and we'll have to continue doing that. All right, any questions about parks or about any of this effort in general?
My day was going pretty well until this afternoon here, Ted.
Where do we get all the money?
Reality.
I have no answer to that question. The thing I can feel good about, though, is that we will have that discussion and decisions will be made. And inevitably, it's going to mean, I believe, there are going to be things where we're going to say, we believe we should be acting on this now, and we are going to choose not to act because we're saying something else is a higher priority for the funding we have available. But this is going to be difficult. It's going to be, I think we're going to find it's going to get uncomfortable at times, acknowledging that there's a need out there that we don't really feel like we're in a position to meet. But where all this is going to go, I don't know. Oh yeah, and one thing I want to say, these first three pieces are the first three because those are the ones that we feel most comfortable with where we are. One thing we think we need to be careful of is there could be a temptation during this budget process to say, okay, well, we know about these, let's do something about them. But there are things in the other pieces that might be higher priorities for you. So just because these happen to be first, I don't think can mean we just try and figure out what to do with these. I would like to be able to present the whole thing to you at once so that wasn't a problem, but we're just not going to be able to do that.
Did we set money aside starting last year with, or I guess last year for maintenance, for infrastructure maintenance? We started a line item for that.
Yeah, you put $2 million aside.
What do we have? Is that ongoing? Is that a one-time thing?
It was one time.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's, a good point. As we look at this, there are different ways we can go about it. One is to identify greater ongoing funding to go to some piece of infrastructure. There will be some years, I hope, where at the end of the year we have money left over that's available to make choices in the future. Choices could be made to plug one-time money into meeting some of these needs, or to set aside money for an eventual decision, to use it in some way to meet an infrastructure need. Ideally, we would have ongoing money at the level we need for all of these pieces, but that doesn't mean that putting in one-time money when we can isn't still a good thing. It doesn't fix your problem, but at least puts you in a better position than you would if you hadn't done it.
Yeah, I'm a real strong advocate of putting together contingency funds for the long-term projects, but there seems to be so much pressure upon us to spend money now. There's a political element to this, and it's hard to get the discipline together to do it. And when we do save that contingency fund, people yell that, why aren't you spending that money now? So it's a tough decision to make.
It is.
I don't know how we're going to pull it off.
And the reality is, any time that you have money sitting on the sideline that could be used today, there will be perfectly legitimate arguments that people will be making to use it today. There will always be tension between those two things.
Okay, the rest of the timeline on this, Ted, the other parts of this, certainly after the budget, right?
We will continue bringing them as we're able to.
Okay.
I don't have a level of confidence to tell you we expect to be done by the end of this year or even by the end of 3 years.
Yeah. Well, we certainly appreciate the effort, and it helps us look out and beyond, which is, very important to us. So we appreciate it.
Inventorying all of our assets is important. Thank you for taking the initiative to do that.
The $2 million we put aside last year, did we use that whole $2 million, or is it still?
It is still there.
Still sitting there. And we put that aside for infrastructure maintenance, I guess is what you would call it. So why didn't we use any of it?
Well, when you put it aside, it was, this idea, we were starting to share this idea with you, and it was put
Right.
aside with an idea of, okay, at some point we need some money, let's put $2 million aside. And the conversation never really advanced beyond that. During this budget process, you could look to make use of it. There's no reason why you can't.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, we just sort of put it,
Yeah, I
sort of
remember
like a
putting it aside,
placeholder,
but I don't
kind of how we
remember.
handled that,
Yeah.
in the anticipation of this,
Yeah.
so. All right, anything else? All right, thank you guys very much. I think that's it for the day. You have anything additional? Laverne?
No, there's a letter and a press release for you guys, a letter to sign to Delegate Rose and a press release to look at from this morning's session. So
Okay,
when you get back to the office.
all right, very good. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Be safe out there, 3 to 5 tonight.